If you're looking for the big adventure and gold is all that's on your mind, if all you want someone to take your picture, then I won't waste your time. See, maybe I'm too quiet for you. You probably never noticed me. But if you're too big to follow rivers, how you ever gonna find the sea? So follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'll do the running for you. Follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'll move the mountains for you. Follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'm here to keep you floating. Follow me, I'll be your river, 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 yes. If all you want are answers to your questions, and you can't seem to find no love for free, if you're looking for the right direction, then darling, look for me. See, I can make the load much lighter. I just need you to confide in me. But if you're too proud to follow rivers, how you ever gonna find the sea? So follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'll do the running for you. Follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'll move the mountains for you. Follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'm here to keep you floating. Follow me, I'll be your river, 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 yeah. Wherever you're standing, I will be by your side. Through the good, through the bad, I'll never be hard to find. I said wherever you're standing, I'll be by your side. Through the good, through the bad, I'll never be hard to find. So follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'll do the running for you. Follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'll move the mountains for you. Follow me, I'll be your river, river. I'm here to keep you floating. Follow me, I'll be your river, 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 here. Wherever you're standing, I'll be by your side. Through the good, through the bad, I'll never be hard to find.
Have you ever imagined Jesus as a river who leads us to the mighty ocean who is God? Isn't that a beautiful way of thinking? There are probably about 175 other images of who Jesus is right here in this room. And we're going to talk about that today. And God has a message, a word, something special for you. So let's take a moment and be still and open our hearts and just be ready to receive whatever word or image or thought God has for you today. Amen.
The first reading for today is from the book of the Ephesians. At that time, you were without Christ. You were aliens rather than citizens of Israel, and strangers to the covenants of God's promise. In this world, you had no hope and no God. But now, thanks to Christ Jesus, you who were once so far away have been brought near by the blood of Christ. Christ is our peace. Christ made both Jews and Gentiles into one group. With his body, he broke down the barrier of hatred that divided us. Christ canceled the detailed rules of the law so that he could create one new person out of the two groups, making peace. He reconciled them both as one body to God by the cross, which ended the hostility to God. When he came, Christ announced the good news of peace to you who were far away from God and to those who are near. We both have access to God through Christ by the Spirit. So now you are no longer strangers and aliens. Rather, you are fellow citizens with God's people, and you belong to God's household.
The second reading for today is from the Gospel of Matthew. Now when Jesus came into the area of Caesarea Philippi, he asked his disciples, "Who do people say the human one is?" They replied, "Some say John the Baptist, others Elijah, and still others Jeremiah, or one of the other prophets." Jesus said, "And what about you? What do you say that I am?"
Did you know that it was possible for two people to see exactly the same thing and interpret it completely differently? It was the same play. Interception, touchdown. You be the judge. Did you know it was possible for millions of people to see the same thing and understand it completely differently? Does anyone have a guess who that's a picture of? No? Excellent. We're going to be talking about Jesus today and how we understand and interpret who Jesus was. And it's part of a series as we're thinking about, there's a trend in Christianity called emerging church. And a lot of people have written some new thoughts, new ideas about everything involved in Christian thinking. So we're going to take a look at some of those wisdom. We're going to think about things in a new key. Last week, if you were here, we talked about God in a new key. And today we're going to talk about Jesus in a new key. So I want to take us back to the image we just saw, because at least for me, this represents Jesus in a very old key. I've been aware of this picture as long as I've been alive, and I imagine most of you have too. It's a painting of Jesus by a guy named Warner Salmon. Did it in 1928, and this is the most widely reproduced piece of art in the history of the world. 500 million reproductions of this painting. And after today, 500 million and one. Okay? And I'm not quite sure how it got to be this popular. Art critics say it's not terribly distinguished by its artistic merit. And remembering that Jesus was a Middle Eastern Jew, he's awfully blonde and blue-eyed. It could have happened, but you know. What it makes me think, though, is of something a preaching teacher told me once that I've always remembered. And that is every single person here sharing this message together, every single person, A, is in some ways like all other people, B, is in some ways like some other people, and C, is in other ways like no other people. There's certain characteristics all human beings as a part of our humanity share in common. I think most people would agree on that. We might disagree on what those are. I might start with saying everybody just wants to be loved. Would you buy that? Would you agree with that? As a spiritual leader, I might say everyone yearns to be reconnected with God, whether they realize that or not. Now, some people would disagree with me on that, but I would say it anyway. Okay? Now, so there are some things we share with everyone. There are other things we share with certain kinds of people in our same group. You may have heard the expression, men are from Mars, women are from Venus, right? There's probably some truth in that, although I'd get in trouble if I started saying what exactly that meant, because we would disagree, and that's okay, you know? But there's probably some truth. I'd want to say that gay men are from a different part of Mars than straight men, you know? And trans men probably a different part. And then you might bring in race or ethnicity or age or political affiliation or religious background or all kinds of things, and pretty soon, you know, you've cut and sliced everyone on different planes and vectors, and everyone has their social location with lots and lots of different factors, and it's not too long before you go down that road before you realize the other truth, which is when all is said and done, every single person is unique and irreplaceable. And while these categories, social location, can shape who we are, they don't define who we are. That there are some senses in which you are like no other person at all. Well, the same is true of Jesus. Jesus, I think, exists on all three of those planes. There are ways in which Jesus is like and connects with absolutely every person who ever lived. And if we want to represent that or image that in art or whatever, we come up with composite images, something like this one. This is a painting that was actually commissioned 20 or 30 years ago, and the intent was to have a figure of Jesus that was not recognizably male or female, and that was not any one ethnicity. It was to try to create an image that anyone who looked at it could see themselves in Jesus. I'll let you decide how successful they were. That was also the thinking behind this mural, which we rededicated a couple of weeks ago. The artist, Doyle Chappell, was here. I'd known for a long time that this image of Jesus, he used male and female models. He used different races and ethnic groups. But I didn't know until this visit that Jesus has one brown eye and one blue eye. Did you all know that? So one way to go is try to create a Jesus everyone can see themselves in equally. And that's a good thing to do. But another good thing we can do is find sometimes we find a Jesus who connects with a particular part of ourselves, something a little more distinctive. So this is a more distinctly Roman Catholic picture of who Jesus is. It calls that to mind. Or you might go with race or ethnicity, this image of Jesus, or this one, or even gender. You may not be able to tell from the distance, this is a female sculpture, a sculpture of a female Christ. The artist calls it Christa on the cross. So this can be important work too. Whatever is an important part of identity, to imagine Jesus meeting us in that place and being like us in that way. And that's a good and appropriate thing to do. But it would be dangerous to stop there, because there'd be a temptation to simply make Jesus over in whatever, make Jesus into whoever we want Jesus to be. And so we also need to go to try to understand as best we can who Jesus was as a unique individual, not connected to anyone or anything else, as a historical person in his lifetime. Who was Jesus and what was important to him, stripping aside those layers as best we can. And fortunately, we don't have to do that ourselves. We have biblical scholars. I'm going to be working with a guy named Marcus Borg for some stuff today, and others who have spent their whole lives trying to get a handle on who Jesus really was in his life on earth and what he really taught and believed and what was important. And the first thing they want us to remember is that Jesus was Jewish. He was raised Jewish. Those culture, those traditions, those practices, those beliefs, while he advanced some new ideas, he never left that tradition. He was interested in enhancing, perfecting, refining his Jewish faith. He did not come intending to start a new religion. He came to fulfill the faith that he was taught. And he did that in very traditional, understandable ways. He was a teacher. He was a rabbi, someone who taught not with long philosophical treatises, but in parables and riddles and proverbs. And he appealed to common everyday things that anyone would understand. He was a healer and an exorcist. And this was a very important part of who he was. There are more stories about Jesus as a healer than any other figure in the Judeo-Christian tradition. And he came as a prophet, as someone who had a clear vision of how God wished the world were run, and it's not what he saw. And he was willing to criticize very harshly the temple and the Roman government for getting in God's way. And in particular, what he saw that offended God's plans is that people weren't being treated equally or well, especially the poor. Most of his proverbs, the moral of the story was, the people who are going to get invited to the banquet are not the people you expect. You think you know what's important, but God has a whole different agenda, and it's going to be the poor and the sick and lepers and women and sinners, and everyone who society leaves out are the ones who's going to be included. The last will be first, and the first will be last. One of the main things Jesus talked about. He didn't talk about what focus on the family thinks is important. He never mentioned abortion, never mentioned homosexuality, but he talked about money a lot. And sometimes money in the sense that it's a blessed thing to be generous and to give, but more often talk about money as dangerous and treacherous and a trap to sidetrack us from the things that are truly important. And another thing that he talked about over and over was a non-violent resistance to evil. And that doesn't make everyone happy either, because a lot of people don't like to imagine Jesus being weak. Brian McLaren is a writer. He's part of this emergent Christian movement I mentioned. He's written about 50 books. I've read about 2 of them. This is one. It's called A New Kind of Christianity. And he quotes one of his most loyal and faithful critics, who says that McLaren and his friends want to recast Jesus as a limp-wrist hippie in a dress with lots of product in his hair, who drank decaf and made pithy Zen statements about life while shopping for the perfect pair of shoes. But then he goes on to say how he really thinks Jesus really is. And in his imagination, Jesus is a prize fighter with a tattoo down his leg, a sword in his hand, and the commitment to make someone bleed. That's the guy I can worship, he says. I cannot worship the hippie diaper halo Christ because I cannot worship a guy that I can beat up. Whoa. Well, I've got one thing to say to him. Tough petunias. Because you're stuck with a Jesus you can beat up. Because Jesus let the Roman soldiers beat him up. He let the Roman soldiers kill him. And he's not allowed to rewrite the story. That's who Jesus was. And then the most amazing thing happened. He rose from the dead. God raised him from the dead. And when that happened, people began to think about Jesus in new and different ways. They began to wonder, maybe there's a little more to this guy than we thought. Maybe he's more than a teacher. Maybe he's more than a prophet. Maybe he is the Messiah. Maybe he is the Christ. Maybe he's not only human, but he's divine too. These were things that Jesus didn't say when he was alive, but that doesn't mean they can't be true, does it? Because we know sometimes the truest, deepest things about ourselves we can't see. Other people see them later. You know people who don't think they're smart, but you know they're brilliant. You know people who don't think they're caring, but everyone around them think they're an angel. And as people thought about who Jesus was, and I believe at least the risen Christ communicated and they had experiences of that, they grew in their understanding of who Jesus was. And so I don't think in our story that Jesus was being rhetorical when he asked the disciples, "Who do you say that I am?" I think he really wanted to know. And you know what? They probably would all have different answers. And we would too. And that's okay, because every one of us is a unique individual. And we have our own understanding of who Jesus is. And there's not necessarily a right answer to this quiz. But I want to tell you how I would answer that question. Who do I say Jesus is? I would go to our second reading today, the one from Ephesians, which is a passage that's been really important to me, as not as long as I can remember, but all the way back to when I applied to be a student at Yale Divinity School. And it was a long, difficult decision how I would apply, but I decided I would apply openly gay, MCC affiliated. Didn't realize no one had ever done that before in the history of the world. But I did. And in the application it says, "What do you hope to bring to MCC?" And I said, I'd like to build bridges of understanding between the gay world and the Christian world. And you know what? Even though I played an absolutely infinitesimal piece in that, we've made a whole lot of progress in those 25 years or so. Way more than I ever would have thought possible. Most mainline Protestant denominations in America today ordain gay people. Many of them bless gay unions. In every state, same-sex interactions are legal. In many states, gay marriages are legal. I never would have thought that was possible. Back then, my first year, when I signed up for a class on public speaking, not preaching, public speaking, taught by a drama student, and we were asked to choose a a passage from any kind of literature, anything at all, that was meaningful to us, because we would be practicing and memorizing and rehearsing and honing and shaping and creating a presentation of whatever text we chose for 12 weeks. We'd be working with it for 12 weeks. And I chose this passage from Ephesians because it spoke very much to who I thought Christ was. The one who proclaimed peace to those of us who felt very, very, very far away, as well as to those who always knew they were close. Christ who broke down the dividing wall of hostility and brought both groups together by forming one new person in place of the two, so that all of us together could access the same God through the same Spirit, thus making peace, so that we are no longer strangers and sojourners, but we are fellow citizens with the saints and members of the household of God. That's who I say Jesus is. Who do you say? Amen.